I'm Layne Hartsell, the Korea IT Times, and I'm here with Michel Bauwens of the P2P Foundation. And Michel is a longtime friend and colleague. I was at the P2P Foundation in the last decade, 2013 to 2019, and he's currently working on a book on civilization, amongst other things. He's a theorist, economist, thinker, and also a bit spiritual in some of your writings. Welcome, Michel.
Pleasure, Layne. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you. Uh, P2P alternatives was just a very tiny idea back around, 2006. It had been coming out of like the cypherpunks of the 90s and into the 2000s. You thought that it looks like there's some kind of new productive system coming about. You wrote an article at the time. Can you first just talk about P2P as it is the seminal aspect of it coming out of that?
Right. So let me just say something prior to this, which is, so I believe change happens through seed forms. So you have, certain system that works for a certain while, and then it starts showing dysfunctions. It's no longer appropriate to the situation, and then you have a crisis. In order to have a new model, you have to look at seed forms, and what I mean is, since you can no longer solve the problems with the old logic, you have to experiment with new logics. And so people are going to leave the old system that is in crisis and are going to try to do things differently. And so I'm an observer of these seed forms. So for example, just to give an idea, at the end of the feudal system, you'd have the invention of purgatory as a concept that allowed Christians to lend money and not go to hell. So that allowed for commerce and banks and all of that. Then you had the printing press that was invented that allowed for the very fast distribution of ideas. And then you had the invention of double entry book accounting, right? So these were like three elements that were seed forms that would find each other and eventually would result in a new system that's called capitalism. And so the question is, what is it today? And so my answer is two concepts: peer-to-peer dynamics and commons. So with peer-to-peer dynamics, I mean the new technological affordance for people to organize non-territorially. So you can say, let's do something together, an alternative operating system like Linux, designing machines together like Arduino, permaculture, learning together about permaculture and reinventing agriculture. And you can both work locally on it, but you can connect translocally. So you can start organizing people non-geographically. And I think that's a fundamental innovation. So I call it the scaling of small group dynamics. So in the kind of conviviality you have, if you live in a village or in a small tribe where you know and trust everyone, you can now project that at a translocal level. So you can create groups of people who collaborate, and they can be in different parts of the world. And of course, what becomes interesting is how is our civilization, which is essentially a territorial relation between the urban and the rural, how is that going to adapt to this new possibility? How are the forces coming from that new thing and the old forces? How are they going to interact, and what is coming out of this new mixture, right? Then the second concept that I use is the commons, which are shared resources that are created, maintained, or protected by a community or a group of stakeholders according to their own regulations. So there is a common object which can be immaterial. It can be shared knowledge or software as well. There is a decision to do it as a commons, where you can have an individual car or you can create a car sharing agreement. So it's a decision that people make to and then the self-regulation is very important because it's not state, it's not public, and it's not private. It's a third way of conceiving the organization of human affairs through mutualization. So commons is mutualizing. So peer-to-peer and commons are related because they now allow, and in the first stage, which is like the open source and free software movement, it allowed communities to coordinate at a global level and produce value together. And so that was the first phase that started, like maybe 20, 25 years ago, which I think is a radical innovation because it creates the capacity to coordinate labor at a global scale without having corporations, without having the state. So I'm not saying those are disappearing, but the possibility is there today to create value outside of the hegemony of those two types of institutions. And the more recent step that I've been looking at is the crypto economy, because there was a problem with open source, which was the following, which is if you were intersecting with the market, you could make a living. So you have a commons of code, which can be reproduced instantly for free. So that doesn't create a market per se. But then you can create all kinds of added services, and then you interface with the market, like training people, certifying people, improving the software for a particular company, etc., etc. So those people would be able to make a living, but the people in the core of these commons would not. So now we have created a second layer, the crypto economy, which now allows for the global financing of global labor, again, outside the control of big corporations and states. And so fundamentally, there is a radical new paradigm, which is going from competing entities, corporations and states, which only think about their own welfare. Like a nation state has no legal obligation to care for the planet. And a corporation has a duty to only care about its shareholders. It has a legal duty. So closed entities that don't see their impact try to shove externalities to the public sphere. So privatize the gains and socialize the losses. And so what we now have are open, transparent ecosystems where all these forces can contribute collectively in a new container, which I call the fourth sector, which is commons-based networks that are able to integrate states for-profit and non-profit activities in a higher level of integration. So that's kind of like, very much in short, the story. And I think you referred to the paper, which was called, what was it called again? Something.
It was in CNET, right?
The Political Economy of Peer Production. Yes, in CNET. That was my first essay. And I think that was groundbreaking in, positing this new possibility. And I think if you would reread it today, it would still make, a lot of sense, like 80% of what I said then, I think is applicable. The only difference is that we're now moving much closer to physical production. Right? At the time, it was the capacity to make software collectively and knowledge commons and designs, but now we are already moving towards what I call cosmo-local production, where the rule is if it's heavy, it's local, and if it's light, it's global. So we need to relocalize our economies because the current globalized trade system is too expensive in terms of matter and energy.
Moving things around, right?
Yeah. So we spend two times more on transport than on making. So
Right.
if we relocalize, we can again, save a lot of matter and energy, right? And this is basically the priority today: is how can we reinvent civilization and society and the political economy in a way that can be in long-term balance with nature, right? So just to give you like a very simple analogy, so we had an immature biosphere, and then there was like something called the oxygen explosion, and that was actually a poison to life before. But eventually it created a mature biosphere. So where the Earth is now seen, the Gaia hypothesis or Earth system sciences, as a system that is like homeostatic. And if something goes wrong here, somehow the whole system re-equilibrates to recreate a long-term equilibrium. And we have now an immature technosphere, which is eating up the biosphere. And we need to learn to have a mature technosphere. And I think that peer production, the commons, are like the key to this transformation.
Mhm.
The capacity to coordinate at a global level while seeing in an open ecosystem the external impact and to know the limits, right? And so you could say that until 5,000 years ago, we had tribal forms of organization based on kinship, and the dominant ways of value exchange were the gift economy and commoning. So the gift is I give you something and you give me something back. The commons is we both collaborated something that we have in common, right? So that was dominant until 5,000 years ago. And then came the civilization model, which invented writing to create a writing elite, and the writing elite created Marxist states. And now I think we are moving to a new coordination system, a peer-to-peer horizontal coordination, global coordination system. So we are, in my view, at a pivot of a new form of, either you could call it a new form of civilization, or you could even call it post-civilization. That's a debate we can have at some point, but definitely, there's an element of post-civilization because it's no longer the territorial link, which is what created civilization, right? The capacity to create a surplus out of agriculture to create urban centers where then you can have a specialized class of managers and innovation and all of that. That is what civilization is about.
It sounds like this new technosocial reality you described sounds like La Via Campesina meets developers, Linux and Bitcoin or something.
Yeah. I have this argument. I don't know how they would think about this, but so I'm not a localist. I'm a cosmolocalist, right? So what's heavy is local, but not what is light. And why is that? So if you think about, why did civilization prevail? And there's a book called Scale by Geoffrey West, and he distinguishes sublinear and superlinear relationships. So sublinear is you have a baby, he has a body size and a brain size. You double the body size of a baby, does the brain double? No, it's only 85%. So there is a loss of efficiency as you scale. But you found out that cities are superlinear. So you double a city, have more than double the innovation. And that is, of course, why civilization wins out from tribal, because it has a higher capacity of extracting surplus. It can create more people who don't have to work in the physical domain, who can think and be innovative. Think about 16th century and the Reformation, when suddenly everybody becomes literate. What an explosion that gave in terms of science and industry.
Have a war,
right? Yeah, that also, of course, but also this capacity to be very productive. So the thesis that I have, and I'm not the only one, Jordan Hall calls it Civium, is that the digital can replace that superlinearity, right? And so the key then becomes to combine the benefits of localization, which is a much lower thermodynamic load or much lower matter energy load, and to combine that with the innovation that happens through these linkages online. And you're probably familiar with digital nomads, because that's, for me, it's an interesting observation. So they're working together in the crypto world. What is light is global and shared, but they're also constantly meeting each other. Right? So they create like an alternative to civilization. So you don't have to live in a big city to innovate. You can regularly come together, learn from each other in a very intense process, and then go back to your, wherever it is that you're working. So which is very much like this, pre-civilizational processes where, you'd have, that's what Graeber describes in The Dawn of Everything, which is you had groups that would only come together like 3 months a year, have a big festival, right?
Right.
So this is a bit kind of what is at least some of the people are doing today. So I predict a neo-ruralization, um, and at the same time, this kind of digital intensity as building blocks of a new way of conceiving of civilization.
The kind of revillaging model. Would you say Burning
Yeah.
Man is an example of something like that?
Yes, yeah, in a way you could say. Of course, it's a kind of an elite gathering, but in terms of like the value system, the original value system, yeah, that's what they wanted to do, right?
Right.
And that's what eco villages are trying to do. So I think the big innovation today is that you don't have to be in a city to be well informed.
Right.
You can live in an eco village, or you can live in Chiang Mai like I do, or somewhere in the mountains like you do, and you can still participate in the global stream of knowledge exchange, and the quality of your life is probably much better than most people who live in cities today.
Right. I mean, we were talking just before we went live or went on recording is that the pollution levels in cities are so high. I think that some of the medical data that we have is something like 11 million or 12 million people will have shortened lives per year just from that, just from living in the city with
Yeah,
the.
Chiang Mai was last week the most polluted city in the world,
There you go.
and I try to get away every spring for 6 weeks, just to preserve my lungs, because I have weak lungs. Um, and if I can afford to leave, but think about all these people who cannot afford to leave. And I think their life expectancy is shortened by 4 years.
In Chiang
If
Mai.
you live in Chiang Mai, because every spring you have what they call the haze, and especially in declining phases, like civilizations and societies goes through ascending and descending phases. So we are now back in a phase of urban decline, which I experienced this in the 70s. I was in my 20s or late teens, and people forget how bad cities were in the 70s.
Were you
But
in Brussels or Amsterdam? Where were
I
you?
was in Brussels, but I visited London, Bethnal Green. I went to New York, and in the Bowery, they were shooting on the street back then, right?
Mm.
So then we had this enormous amount of improvements until 2018, 2020. And now we have a very fast decline of cities with homelessness and, trank and fentanyl, and,
See.
less and less public services and all of that. So, yeah, at least in Western countries, there is already a substantial process of disurbanization. In France, it's very strong. They talk about neo-ruralization. Cities like New York and San Francisco have lost, 300,000 people in 2 years.
Wow.
Uh,
You mean
yeah,
deaths?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
And
there
no,
really
people leaving.
there needs to
People are
be
just leaving.
this P2P. If people are feeling that alienated, disconnected, and all of that stuff, the
Right.
train, maybe you have some solutions for P2P, which I can ask you about. But I first want to ask you, Michel, what is the current state of P2P? What do the theorists like yourself agree upon largely, and then what are some of the challenges or disagreements?
Well, it's so you have to see it peer-to-peer is like a practice, right? It's commoning. So it's people who join together to do something together that they agree on, like making a new piece of software, sharing sensor data about pollution, and all of these things are growing very fast, um, and exponentially. If you look at the number of open source code, you look so different criteria, you will see it's growing. But the thing is, it's not specific politics; it's a practice. So the advantage of commoning is that you can put between brackets other disagreements. So, I went to something called Suzaru, Montenegro. It was a 2-month gathering of the Ethereum community. And I was sitting on a table with a deep adaptationist, so people who believe collapse is unavoidable, an impact investor, which some people would criticize as greenwashers, and a climate denialist who say, oh, that's all bullshit, there's not nothing. So, whatever the merits of these 3 different positions, because they all believed in crypto and they were all collaborating on the creation of a common infrastructure, they could put this between brackets, right? And so in a way, the commons is relatively the best place to survive the age of polarization. So if you look at civilizational transition, and I studied civilization history since 2020, so I'm reading all these macro historians, Spengler, Toynbee, Quigley, Sorokin, and many others. And so typically, you have a relatively stable system. So a particular form of civilization or society that has a ascending cycle, a peak and a descending cycle. When the model is really, really challenged at the end of its rope, then you have a chaotic transition.
Mm-hmm.
A chaotic transition means that the legitimacy of the institutions, the narrative that holds people together is breaking down. So you have fragmentation.
Right.
Fragmentation creates polarization. Like, who is most with me? Where can I find refuge? So you had the pagan church and the Christian church at the end of the Roman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
You have the Reformation, the Catholics at the end of the feudal era. And now you have the culture war at the end of the neoliberal era. And so outside of the commons, things are pretty dire because people are tribalizing politically. And, that's the United States. You can see how people are leaving California to live in Florida or Texas. And maybe if you're liberal, you move outside of Florida and Texas. So people are actually moving physically, according to their tribe ideological affiliations. And in each case, it ends with civil war. We had 300 years of war.
We're almost on it right now.
Around the Reformation. And, I think now we have an ideological war where, every institution is being mobilized to take part in this struggle. The way I see it is that, so there's a split in the ruling class between those that want to sacrifice the nation to the empire. Let's go in the globalists, the WEF, the Clintons, it's the transnational financial class, and they have a vision of global governance through domain-specific multi-stakeholder negotiations, but under the leadership and dominance of financial capital.
Okay.
Then the counter-reaction is the Trump Brexit camp, which is, no, we have to sacrifice the empire and go back to the nation. Bring back production locally, stop having wars abroad that are not in our direct interest. And so both of them are seeking alliances, right? And that's where I think the globalists are supported by the educated classes in the cities, and the nationalists are supported by the productive class, by the people who work with their hands and are not so educated. And that is reflected in the global geopolitics, because you have the Western bloc and you have Russia-China bloc with the BRICS, and they're also nationalists. They're neo-sovereignists. They want to restore the state, right? Mm-hmm. So we have market controlling the state in the West. You can't be a president if you don't have at least $1 billion. And on the Eastern Eurasia, it's just the opposite. You can't be an oligarch without the agreement of the state.
Right.
And of course, however marginal, I think the commons represents a third wave, which is not market nor state-centric, but common-centric. And we want to create institutions that can absorb the functionalities of the market and the state in a more integrative meta level. And so transitions are always either a step down. So you don't have enough to maintain a surplus. So you go to a
Mhm.
lower form of complexity. That's what happened, between the Roman Empire and feudalism, like a complete simplification. No more cities, no more roads, no more literacy, etc. Or you can go the way from feudalism to capitalism, which was to create a higher level of integration around capital, nation, and state,
Mhm.
and push the religious civil war on in the margins as a personal belief that no longer mattered for the organization of their societies. So this time it's the same. We can either go down to a more localist kind of level, but I think that will, a lot of people will die, or we can hope to create a higher level of integration, which I think, we have a reasonable chance to achieve.
So this is the state of P2P, right? When we're talking about the state, I want people to understand we're not talking about the state, like the citadel,
The
the city.
states, the states
Yeah,
of
we're talking
P2P,
about
right?
state of
The
being, right? The
states of
state of,
P2P. And,
yeah.
if you want to understand the crypto movement, so what you have to understand is that these are people who want to create functional equivalents to the state and to big corporations, right? Their dream is to create like a networked world where the network itself can take care of itself. So if you look at, for
Mhm.
example, the Ethereum community, they now have their own taxes, and they tax the use of these blockchains.
Mhm.
It's called optimism, like it's one of these pipes. Let's put it that way. Where the currency can flow,
Uh,
and you have like a fee, and they double the fee, and half of the fee goes to Gitcoin, which is like a public treasury to fund commons work,
okay, okay.
right? So you have networks that are self-infrastructuring and creating their own commons outside of market and states, right? So
Got
this
it.
is this is kind of like what. And so what I'm saying is, as long as you stay at the financial level, that's not enough. You need connection to the productive world. So I call it crypto for real, and I'm arguing within the crypto community that they should become serious. So because what they're doing now is like an arbitrage for an elite, right? You have a coding elite, let's put it that way. So it's like a writing elite 5,000 years ago, and they
Mhm.
created a world with their image. And now we have a coding elite that has access to their own means of production, the computers, but don't control the networks. And so they say, oh, we have to create our own network so we can control our own value streams. And so what they're doing is they're doing arbitrage between nation states. Where is it
Okay.
best for us to live? Where do we pay the least amount of taxes? Right? But this is a flawed strategy for me because there's always a point where if you don't have access to food directly,
Mhm.
some people may not accept your bitcoins. So at the end of the Roman Empire, the monetary system collapsed, and it
Right.
became, a physical system where, so the cities were crumbling. So you were looking to go back to the countryside, right? And then you became a tenant. And if you didn't get paid enough, you moved to another landlord.
Mhm.
But then the state said, well, we can't have enough tax revenue, so we will force those tenants to stay put. So they became colonial serfs, right? So that the landlords could pay their taxes to the state. So that's what happened at the end of the Roman Empire. But the thing is that eventually, like, if you didn't have a connection to the land, you would not survive.
Right.
And so I think crypto needs this connection with real production, and needs to become like the tool to cosmo-localize production, right? So you have
Right.
local people doing their local thing, but the learning can take place and the payment can take place at that translocal level. That doesn't necessarily have to be a state or a corporate level.
I got it. Yeah. It's a compelling vision and argument. And I think that, of course, since we were talking about cryptocurrency, I noticed that Bitcoin was in the news. It went over $72,000. I think I had it up here on the
Yeah.
computer earlier. But anyway, When I first came to the P2P Foundation to do research, you had just been chatting with Satoshi Nakamoto, who apparently is some kind of group of developers and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about what these conversations were? I think Seb Hasselberger was there,
They were
and then
not,
how. And you can see now that it's manifesting into this
yeah,
thing you're talking about.
they were not very extensive conversations, but he wrote to me, basically he posted his white paper on the P2P Foundation.
That's right.
It's p2pfoundationning.com. And I think Bitcoin Magazine has like a whole record of all these conversations. Um, and he offered me Bitcoins, and unfortunately, I didn't respond to that. So I missed being a Bitcoin billionaire. Uh, and then he wrote me again another time to deny that he was a Japanese guy.
Right.
And then he wrote me again maybe 2 years ago that he would reconnect with me, but he didn't. And nowadays, people say that maybe his email has been hacked. So I have no idea. I don't make any claims except that a person that claims to be Satoshi Nakamoto wrote to me. But I think certainly the first and the second round were authentic.
But early on,
And
and he wrote Seb Hasselberger too, who was also a researcher there. So I've
it's
looked
on the
at the
same place. Yeah, it's in the same place.
same
It's on the
thing.
link forum. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. We were. This
it's
is
interesting.
in the context of the P2P Foundation. So P2P Foundation is not a libertarian outfit, but we always say, it's social P2P for us. It's not the computer connections, but the people using the computers
Right.
that, have this new capability of translocal connection. That's what we call P2P, right? But I think he got that, and that's why he chose it.
Sure.
That he,
We take a look at
I
the white
also
paper.
was the first to tweet in the world about Bitcoin.
Yeah, I know the white paper showed
So
up there.
if I will be remembered late, after my death, it will not be because of all the work I've done.
Because you tweeted Bitcoin the first time.
I tweeted Bitcoin. Yeah.
If you take a look at the white paper, the developer talks about uh, basically mining these coins, this code, a cryptographic graph enigma. You mine this thing and you get these coins back, which is just a code with the, that you get like an address. And it looks like to me that, this was at the time when there was a massive financial crisis, right? And you and I have talked a lot about this, about the financial crisis. It looks like to me that the idea of the devs in this case were to start getting money into people's hands everywhere. So if you had a CPU, a computer at home, you could begin to start mining these coins. I don't think, and I think that this was fundamentally.
It's the first globally scalable non-state currency. Right?
Exactly.
I call it socially sovereign because it's based on the trust of the people in the protocol. So, and of course, it was done in anticipation of a crisis, what they call the fiat currency, right, which is a nation-state currency. So the form of consciousness, if you like, that they have is already translocal, right? And it's. I don't think it functions well as a currency, but it's become like a gold equivalent.
Right.
The advantage being you can travel with it wherever you are. You always have access, to your. So it's like a global collateral currency, in my view. That's the way I see it. It's like
It sounds like I could be talking to Larry Fink of the BlackRock right now. You and him are saying the same things. So it looks like the developers were trying to get money into the hands of regular people, but then it kind of got into this. You have these big mining companies and all this kind of thing. So it became more like a digital gold, right? You're calling it a store of value rather than a rough and ready cash.
Yeah, it's not it's too volatile, to be used in commerce. It's what do you call it, logarithmic. So it goes up, then it falls, and it goes up. Well, it's so the story is that the line that you can put in between is one of constant growth of value, but it goes through these ups and downs in the meantime. And
Right.
so it's kind of like a counter-cyclical currency. It's so when the fiat currencies go bad, then a lot of more people have incentive to buy into Bitcoin as a safety currency.
Okay.
And I think that's so you can look at like the Cyprus crisis and then suddenly you see or Argentine crisis, you see the price of Bitcoin go up, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Last time it was because the interest was so low on money, and there was so it was easy to borrow money. There was a surplus of money, and so everybody started to put 5% of their holdings in Bitcoin. But then the interest rates went up, and then Bitcoin crashed again, right? And now I'm not sure why it's going up, but yeah, I think it's because in anticipation of a new crisis.
That's so let me take a look at it here. I've got two computers. Oh, it says 72,320. That's what it is right now. Let me I want to move into I have two more questions for you, but I know that time is short. Let me put these questions out there, and you take the one that you think is most applicable. I know you're traveling in 2 days, so you've got to get some rest, and I'm taking all your time. Capitalism and discontent, which is some of what you've talked about, or the AI promises and perils. Maybe AI might be something that people want to hear about right now. What do you
All
think?
right. Um, so so here's what I see as an emergent mutual coordination infrastructure. So at the base level, we can coordinate labor in these open ecosystems. So you have a layer of stigmergic signals. So I know what to do on Wikipedia.
What is stigmergic?
Stigmergy is the name we give to the language of the ants because they communicate through signals. Like an ant, uses pheromones, and a bee is dancing,
Right.
to indicate where other bees have to go. So these insects follow each other based on signals. And so we now have created an open ecosystem where we can see the signals of work being done on collective projects, right? So that's like the base level. Then, of course, the second level is we have to deal with scarce resources. And typically that's what we've used money for, except that we now have one money, divided in nation state currencies, but we could imagine domain specific cryptocurrencies, which are thermodynamically informed. What I mean is that for example, you can have things like Fishcoin, which tells you how much fish you can fish without destroying the reproduction of the fish, right? So I imagine a second layer, which is like a regenerative market. So it's still a market because market is a signal for scarcity, but it's money that is now informed of material limits. Then the third level, and this is where I think AI can come in. So we need to know. So this is called context-based sustainability. Like every entity, every agent in the economy, every citizen should be able to know what the resource limits are of his activity, right? So what you do is you infuse the accounting system that is now open and shared. So that's another innovation of the Bitcoin and blockchain. We now have a global distributed ledger. So instead of every company having its own accounting and it cannot see what the others are doing, we now have an open ecosystem where everybody can see in 3D, and so we have new accounting systems like REA, resources, agents, events, where every transaction is a 3D recognition of where you are in the network.
Okay.
So I'm imagining a new type of institution, which I call Magisteria of the Commons, that protect certain domains of life and resources. So we would have a system called global thresholds and allocations. So how much copper is there? What's the average productivity growth of the use of copper? What's the biocircularity of copper? So how should we divide up the copper so that we don't go to war for the copper? And I think for those types of things, AI is going to be crucial. For very complex, multidimensional, knowledge that we need. So I'm not at all about AI being like the new master of the human race, or I think the problem with AI is that it is controlled by private forces.
Right.
That's one, by ideological forces. If you have followed Gemini, you have this kind of woke programming, and then you ask for Nazis, and then you have black Nazis, right? Because
I saw these images, right? It's
they
comical.
but this is very serious, because it means that they can serve as a version of reality that, and here it was so obvious, right? But Google has been doing this for 15 years already, and most people are not aware of it. But if you can test it and look for Google images, and you'll see it's the same as Gemini. It's not so badly done. But the thing is, they are teaching us to think differently according to their own corporate and ideological agenda. So the problem for AI, for me, is the problem of democratization. So we should have data commons, right?
Mhm.
And then the data commons will have an AI, which is an open source AI in the control of the community, not corporation. So I see AI as a kind of a useful servant for vital human endeavors where we need very complex visualizations of very complex data. And I think everything else is ideology. It's a religion. It's a transhuman religion. I don't think it's realistic. I don't think that it's truly intelligent. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I at least that is my belief, that the problems with AI are its ownership structure. And so the thing is, if you know the labor theory of value, right? So value comes from labor. If there's no human intervention, it's not worth anything. Gold in the ground is gold in the ground, unless there's a machine or human being taking it out. It's no value. So what AI does, open source, digital in general, is creating a super productivity, right?
Mhm.
One programmer programs a software program, and you can copy it to millions of people. So you're making labor hyper productive.
Right.
Now you can do a step further, which is a person writes an AI software, which writes software,
Right. Right.
right?
Exactly.
So so what is the problem? The problem is we no longer need to pay people.
That's right.
So who's going to use? How are these people making a living if that productivity revolution is controlled by some oligarchic owners, right? And that's going to create a huge value crisis in our society. So we need to socialize AI, but I don't mean socialize in terms of nationalize, but data commons, like communities of contributors, all the stakeholders that have an interest, they should be part of so we need polycentric governance models, right? Which is what the commons did. So you
Mhm.
have, corporations and states, and polycentric governance is complex systems. We need to align various stakeholders. And that is, again, what crypto is trying to do, is how to align, these different, the miners, the founders, the developers, the users in like one polycentric system where no single force can dominate the others. Right. So that's the ideal of crypto governance, of P2P governance, is to create um, decentralized, distributed forms of power where different stakeholders keep each other in check, and not a single player can hijack the system.
I call this distributed, of course, but democratic confederalism, which is the Iroquois model, which you have these
Right.
distributed systems,
Right.
and they're
Yeah.
highly.
I mean, there's a whole tradition of these traditional governance models that you call, but also medieval cities with the guilds.
Medieval cities.
You know,
Yep.
they also were run in that particular way. the different guilds had agreements to run the cities together. Eventually, the merchants took over, and then individual merchants, but it took 300 years to do. So, they worked between the 11th and the 13th century. We had free autonomous cities in a very distributed environment. Look at the maps of Germany, the Holy Roman Empire. It's a patchwork of hundreds and hundreds of independent, regional power.
They were at that time. They were a lot more integrated with nature. Even though it was a city, it wasn't like these massive megapolis kind of things that were coming about. When I heard you talking a moment ago, I thought about in the starting in the 1990s, when you could start putting up actual documents onto the web, and then you get the design. So you have code, and you have design, and you have knowledge, and all that. Now all of a sudden, now you've got all this up on the web, right? Up on the internet. Now what AI allows you to do is start dumping all of that into AI, like a kind of recursive situation that creates an exponential explosion. And we've had a year of it, and it's extraordinary.
What Marshall McLuhan says is that technology enhances collective humanity, but diminishes individual humanity, right? So every technology is a handicap. A car cuts your legs. A calculating machine stops you from knowing how to count. And so the danger of AI is, garbage in, garbage out. Is that if you're not properly educated, then you're going to ask very simplistic questions. You're going to have maybe wrong answers you wouldn't even know. So I have my fears about AI, about how it can be abused and misused and used as a tool of manipulation. And people outsourcing their responsibility to highly manipulative pieces of technology, right? And again, to mention crypto, but that's what they're trying to do, to create protected spaces from the state in the market, right? Censorship resistant, anonymous. So this is all being done in the crypto world, to create like translocal free zones of freedom and communication. And I think they're doing, an important work there.
Yeah, Edward Snowden, just yesterday, I think it was Edward Snowden, the computer expert that worked for the U.S. government and released the information about surveillance. He said that if all of the developers were to stop right now, that would be the end of life as we know it, the end of everything working, right?
Yeah.
But I'll just say, Michel, it's been nice talking to you. Thank you so much for your time, and best wishes in Europe.